The stars stretched endlessly before Captain Jake Morrison as he stood on the bridge of the Aurora. He had been patrolling the outer rim for 3 months now, checking trade routes and making sure everything stayed peaceful. The ship hummed quietly around him while his crew worked at their stations. Space was calm today, just like most days since humanity joined the Galactic Council 150 years ago. Dr. Lisa Grant walked up beside him, holding a data pad with their latest reports. She was the best medical officer Jake had ever worked with, smart and caring in ways that made everyone on the ship feel safe. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had that look on her face that meant she was thinking hard about something important. "Jake, I just finished reading the Council's new updates about the protection law," she said quietly. "They're making it even stronger this year. Any species that hurts children from another race will face complete exile from Council space." Jake nodded and smiled a little. The protection of developing minds was the most sacred law in the galaxy. Every species agreed that children were off limits no matter what happened between their governments. It was the one thing that kept 47 different alien races from tearing each other apart. Humans had been some of the strongest supporters of this law because protecting kids just felt natural to them. "Good," Jake said. "Some things should never be touched, no matter how angry people get at each other." The bridge was peaceful for another hour before everything changed. Lieutenant Danny Murphy, their communications officer, suddenly straightened up at his station. His face went pale and he pressed his earpiece harder against his head. "Captain, I'm getting a distress signal," Danny said, his voice shaking a little. "It's from the colony ship New Haven. They're about 6 hours away from us." Jake turned around quickly. The New Haven was carrying 3,000 people to establish a new human settlement on Kepler 442b. Most importantly, it had 800 children on board, families looking for a better life on a new world. "What kind of distress?" Jake asked. Danny listened for a few more seconds, his face getting whiter. "Sir, they say they're under attack. Multiple ships are firing on them. They're asking for immediate help." Dr. Grant dropped her datapad. "Under attack? Who would attack a colony ship? That's against every law the Council has." Jake was already moving toward his command chair. "Set course for their position, maximum speed. Danny, try to get more information about who's attacking them." The Aurora's engines roared to life as they changed direction. Jake felt his stomach twist with worry. Colony ships were supposed to be completely safe. Everyone in the galaxy knew they only carried families and supplies, nothing that could threaten anyone. "Captain?" Danny called out again, and now his voice was really scared. "I'm picking up more signals. The attacking ships, they're Council enforcement vessels." The bridge went completely silent. Dr. Grant stared at Danny like he had just said something impossible. "Council ships were supposed to protect colony vessels, not attack them." "That can't be right," Jake said. "Run the scan again." Danny's fingers flew over his controls. "I'm checking 3 times, sir." The ship signatures match Council enforcement design. The lead vessel is broadcasting Vorthak military codes. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. The Vorthak were a reptilian species that had joined the Council only 20 years ago. They were known for being aggressive and militaristic, but they had agreed to follow all Council laws, including the protection law. "How long until we reach them?" Jake asked. 4 hours and 30 minutes at this speed," came the reply from the navigation station. "Push the engines harder. I don't care if we burn them out." Dr. Grant was already preparing her medical bay for casualties. She moved quickly, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. Everyone on the ship knew that if Council forces were really attacking a colony ship, something had gone very wrong with the galaxy. The next 4 hours felt like the longest in Jake's life. Reports kept coming in from the New Haven, and each one was worse than the last. The Vorthak ships weren't just attacking randomly. They were specifically targeting the sections of the colony ship where families lived. The school areas, the nurseries, the family quarters, all of them were being hit by heavy weapons. "Captain," Danny said, his voice barely a whisper now. "New Haven is reporting. They're reporting that the enemy ships are demanding they surrender all their children." Dr. Grant made a sound like someone had hit her. "What?" "The Vorthak commander is saying the human children are potential future threats and need to be taken into Council custody for proper education." Jake gripped his command chair so hard his knuckles went white. In all his years of space travel, he had never heard of anything so horrible. Taking children away from their families was exactly the kind of thing the protection law was supposed to prevent. Are we close enough to see them yet? Jake asked. Visual contact in 10 minutes, sir. When the New Haven finally appeared on their main screen, Jake felt sick to his stomach. The beautiful white colony ship that was supposed to carry hope to a new world was now covered in black burn marks. Pieces of metal floated around it in space where the hull had been torn open. Worst of all, Jake could see that most of the damage was concentrated on the lower decks where the families lived. 5 Vorthak warships surrounded the colony vessel like predators circling wounded prey. Their dark green hulls bristled with weapons, all pointed at the defenseless civilians. "Danny, open a channel to the Vorthak ships," Jake ordered. "Channel open." "Sir? This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Aurora. You are attacking a civilian colony ship in violation of Galactic Council law. Stop your attack immediately." A harsh reptilian voice answered him. "Human vessel, you will withdraw from this area. We are conducting a legitimate enforcement action under Council authority. The colony ship New Haven has violated territorial boundaries and must be searched for contraband." "Contraband?" Jake almost shouted. "You're targeting their family areas. There are children on that ship." "Precisely," the Vorthak commander replied, and Jake could hear the coldness in his voice. "Human offspring represent a clear and present danger to galactic security. They will be removed for proper processing." Dr. Grant had come up beside Jake again, and he could see tears in her eyes as she listened to the communications.
"Jake," she whispered, "they're talking about the children like they're weapons." The New Haven's captain came on the emergency channel, his voice breaking with desperation.
"Aurora, this is Captain Bill Harris. They've already hit our school sections. We have children dying over here. Please, we need help." Jake looked at the tactical display. His single ship against 5 Vorthak warships. The Aurora was fast and well-armed for an exploration vessel, but it wasn't a battleship. In a straight fight, they would lose quickly. But as he watched another blast from the Vorthak ships tear into the New Haven's nursery section, Jake realized he didn't care about the odds. Some things were more important than winning. "Dr. Grant, prepare for emergency medical evacuations," he said quietly. "Danny, send a message to Admiral Douglas. Tell him what we found here. Tell him the sacred law has been broken." The Vorthak ships fired again, and this time Jake could hear children screaming through the emergency broadcasts. The sound cut through him like a knife, and he knew that everything had changed forever. The galaxy had just crossed a line that should never be crossed, and humanity would never be the same. The rescue operation at New Haven took 18 hours, and Jake Morrison would never forget a single minute of it. His crew worked like machines, pulling survivors from the burning colony ship, while the Vorthak vessels watched from a distance. The reptilian ships had stopped firing when the Aurora arrived, but they made it clear they were just waiting. Dr. Lisa Grant's medical bay became a nightmare of injured children and grieving parents. Jake walked through the corridors and saw things that made his hands shake with anger. 8-year-old Jenny Parker had burns covering half her body from when the Vorthak plasma cannons hit her classroom. 12-year-old Bobby Chen kept asking where his little sister was, not understanding that she was never coming home. The final count was devastating. 127 children dead, 203 wounded, families torn apart forever. Jake stood in the cargo bay where they had laid out the small bodies and felt something break inside his chest. These weren't soldiers or warriors. They were just kids who wanted to see a new planet. Commander Ben Torres arrived with his Special Forces team 6 hours after the rescue began. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. But even he stopped cold when he saw the medical bay. Ben had fought in the border conflicts with the Zephyrian pirates. But nothing had prepared him for this, Jesus Christ. "Jake," Ben whispered as he watched Dr. Grant trying to save a 5-year-old boy who kept crying for his mommy. "What kind of monsters target children?" "The kind that sit on the Galactic Council, apparently," Jake replied, his voice bitter as poison. The news spread through human space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. Every human colony, every space station, every ship heard about New Haven within 24 hours. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted on Earth. Colonial governors demanded explanations. Military commanders started checking their weapons systems. Ambassador Helen Carter was humanity's voice on the Galactic Council, a smart woman who had spent 30 years trying to build bridges between species. She stood before the council 3 days after the attack. Her usually calm face twisted with grief and rage. 127 children, she said, her voice echoing through the massive council chamber. 127 innocent lives snuffed out because your enforcement ships decided that human kids were dangerous. Council Prime Zethkar sat on his elevated platform like a king on a throne. The ancient reptilian leader had been in charge of the council for over 50 years, and his cold yellow eyes showed no emotion as Helen spoke. Ambassador Carter, Zethkar said in his dry, rasping voice. Regrettable incidents sometimes occur during legitimate enforcement operations. The Vorthak Confederation was acting within their authority to inspect vessels in disputed territory. Helen felt her heart stop. Disputed territory? That was open space on the approved colonial route. And even if it wasn't, that doesn't give anyone the right to murder children. A low murmur went through the council chamber. Representatives from 46 alien species watched the exchange with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. Many of them had started to view humans as too emotional and unpredictable since they joined the council. General Zarthok of the Vorthak military stood up from his section. He was massive even for his species, with dark green scales and teeth like daggers. The human colony vessel was carrying potential military assets, he declared. Human offspring are raised from birth with aggressive tendencies and combat training. They represent a future threat to galactic peace. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Dr. Alex Warren, who had spent the last 3 days treating the traumatized survivors, watched from the observation deck and felt his blood turn to ice. These aliens were talking about human children like they were weapons factories. Helen Carter's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Are you seriously suggesting that a 5-year-old girl learning to read is a military threat? Human development patterns are well documented, Zarthok continued coldly. Your species teaches competition, aggression, and individual achievement from the earliest age. This creates warriors, not peaceful citizens. Jake Morrison was watching the council session from his ship and had to grip his command chair to keep from screaming. These creatures were taking everything beautiful about human childhood and twisting it into something evil. Teaching kids to try their best, to stand up for themselves, to protect their friends. Somehow that made them dangerous. Council Prime Zethkar raised one clawed hand for silence. The matter is concluded, he announced. The Vorthak Confederation acted within council guidelines. No further action will be taken. Helen Carter stared at him in disbelief. No action? Children are dead and you're calling it guidelines? The council has spoken, Ambassador. Perhaps humanity should consider adjusting their child-rearing practices to be more in line with galactic standards. That was the moment everything changed. Helen Carter had spent decades believing in diplomacy and cooperation, but as she looked around the council chamber, she realized the truth. These aliens didn't see human children as innocents to be protected. They saw them as problems to be solved. Back on Earth, Admiral Carl Douglas was getting reports from across human space. Colonial militias were mobilizing without orders. Trade ship captains were requesting weapon upgrades. Even civilian vessels were organizing into defensive convoys. The attack on New Haven had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping since they joined the council. Dr. Warren finished his psychological evaluation of the survivors, and the results made him sick. The Vorthak hadn't just attacked randomly. They had specifically targeted areas where children would be most vulnerable and afraid. The school during class time, the nursery during nap hour, the playground during recess. It was calculated terrorism designed to cause maximum trauma. Lieutenant Kate Williams sat beside the hospital bed of her 8-year-old sister Emma, one of the survivors from New Haven. Emma hadn't spoken since the rescue, just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. Kate was a communications officer on Admiral Douglas's staff, but right now she was just a big sister watching her little girl fade away. The doctors say she might recover, Kate whispered to Jake when he came to visit, but she keeps having nightmares about the green ships coming back. Jake looked down at Emma and felt rage burning in his chest like a nuclear reactor. This was what the council called a legitimate enforcement action. A little girl too scared to sleep because monsters in starships had tried to murder her for the crime of being human. Commander Torres found Jake in the hospital hallway an hour later. I've been getting calls from Special Forces units across the sector, Ben said quietly. They want to know when we're going to hit back. Admiral Douglas says we stick to diplomatic channels, Jake replied, but his voice sounded hollow. Douglas is a good man, but he's thinking like a politician. My people are thinking like soldiers who just watched kids get slaughtered. Jake looked through the window at Emma Williams, still staring at nothing with haunted eyes. Then he looked at the other children in the ward, all of them carrying scars they would never fully heal from. The council had broken the most sacred law in the galaxy and called it policy. Ben, Jake said slowly, what if diplomatic channels aren't enough anymore? Torres smiled grimly. Then we make our own channels. Far across the galaxy, in the deepest vaults of Vorthak space, General Zarthok was reviewing detailed psychological profiles of human children. The files contained information about their learning patterns, their emotional development, their social behaviors. But most importantly, they contained plans for future operations. New Haven had been just a test run. The real campaign against human youth was about to begin. Jake Morrison made his decision 3 weeks after the council session ended. He stood in his quarters aboard the Aurora, looking at the official order from Earth Command that told him to return to normal patrol duties. The message said that diplomatic efforts were ongoing and that military personnel should avoid any actions that might escalate tensions with the council. Jake deleted the message without reading it a second time. Dr. Lisa Grant found him in the ship's armory an hour later, checking weapon systems that hadn't been used in years. She knew that look on his face and it scared her more than the Vorthak ships had. Jake, what are you doing? She asked quietly. Getting ready, he replied without looking up from the plasma rifle he was inspecting. Ready for what? Jake finally turned to face her and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before New Haven. It was cold and hard and absolutely determined. Lisa, do you remember what Emma Williams said when she finally started talking again? Dr. Grant nodded sadly. The little girl's first words after 3 weeks of silence had broken everyone's heart. She had looked at her sister Kate and whispered, "Why didn't anyone help us?" The council won't help, Jake continued. Earth Command won't help. So we're going to help ourselves. Word spread quickly through the human fleet that Captain Morrison was going rogue. Within 48 hours, 6 other ships had joined him at the secret meeting point in the asteroid belt near Ceres Station. Captain Steve Reynolds brought the heavy cruiser Defiance, along with its crew of seasoned veterans who remembered when humans had to fight for everything they had. Chief Engineer Maria Santos arrived on the transport vessel Liberty, with a cargo hold full of weapon modifications that weren't exactly legal under council regulations. She was Jake's oldest friend, someone who had saved his life more than once during the Zephyrian conflicts, and she understood what needed to be done. The council thinks we're going to roll over and accept this, Maria said as she installed improved shield generators on the Aurora. They think humans are too civilized to fight back when our kids get murdered. Lieutenant Kate Williams had taken leave from her official duties to join Jake's growing fleet. She brought with her detailed intelligence reports about Vorthak military movements and communication codes that she had collected during her work with Admiral Douglas. Her sister Emma was still in therapy, still waking up screaming about green ships, and Kate wanted revenge. The breakthrough came when Dr. Peter Hayes arrived with information that changed everything. Hayes was a geneticist who had been studying alien psychology for the Council's cultural exchange program. But the attack on New Haven had opened his eyes to some disturbing patterns in the data. Jake, you need to see this, Hayes said as he activated a holographic display in the Aurora's briefing room. I've been analyzing Council records going back 20 years. Looking for other incidents involving human civilians. The display showed dozens of cases that had been classified as accidents or isolated incidents. A human research station that suffered a reactor failure after refusing to hand over their children for council inspection. A colony ship that disappeared near Vorthak space after reporting harassment about their school programs. Families that had been separated during routine council inspections and never reunited. It's been happening for years, Hayes continued, his voice shaking with anger. The attack on New Haven wasn't the first time. It was just the first time they did it openly. Captain Reynolds studied the data with the eyes of a military strategist. This is systematic, he said. They've been testing us, seeing how far they could push before we pushed back. Maria Santos pulled up technical specifications for Vorthak weapon systems. Look at this, she said, pointing to energy signatures from the New Haven attack. These aren't standard ship-to-ship weapons. They're designed for precision strikes against soft targets. They built these guns specifically to kill civilians. Jake felt something break inside his chest as he realized the full scope of what they were facing. The Council hadn't just allowed an attack on human children. They had been planning it for decades. The fleet that gathered around Jake Morrison grew to 15 ships within a month. They came from all over human space: cargo haulers whose crews had lost family on New Haven, patrol vessels whose captains were tired of following orders that protected aliens while abandoning humans, even a few military ships whose commanders couldn't stomach the official policy of diplomatic patience. Admiral Carl Douglas knew what was happening, but he didn't try to stop it. Late one night, he sent Jake an encrypted message that contained detailed intelligence about Vorthak military installations and fleet movements. The message officially never existed, but Jake understood that even Earth's highest commanders were tired of watching children die while politicians talked. The real revelation came when Jake's fleet discovered the hidden research station in the Kepler 442 system. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, checking on reports of unusual energy signatures near the planet that New Haven had been heading for. What they found instead was a nightmare. The station was Vorthak built, but it carried council authorization codes. Inside, Jake's boarding teams found laboratories full of detailed psychological profiles on human children. The aliens had been studying how human kids learned, how they played, how they formed relationships with their families and friends, but the worst part was what they found in the station's main computer core. Dr. Hayes accessed the files and his face went white as he read them. "Jake," he whispered, "they call it Project Domestication. They believe that human children are the key to controlling our species. If they can break the bond between human parents and kids, they think they can make us more manageable." The files contained detailed plans for psychological warfare designed to traumatize human families. The attack on New Haven had been labeled as Test Case Alpha. There were plans for dozens more operations, each one designed to be more devastating than the last. Lieutenant Williams found recordings of council meetings where alien leaders discussed humans like they were dangerous animals that needed to be tamed. She heard General Zarthok explaining that human protective instincts toward their young made them unpredictable and potentially rebellious. If we can demonstrate that their offspring are not safe anywhere, the Vorthak general said in one recording, the humans will become more cooperative and less likely to challenge council authority. Jake Morrison stood in the research station's main laboratory, surrounded by evidence of the most evil conspiracy he had ever imagined. These aliens had spent years studying human children not to help them, but to find better ways to hurt them. Captain Reynolds found Jake there an hour later, staring at photos of New Haven's victims that the Vorthak had been using to measure the effectiveness of their psychological weapons. "What are your orders, sir?" Reynolds asked quietly. Jake looked at the pictures of children who had died because aliens thought their love for their families made them dangerous. He thought about Emma Williams, still afraid to sleep without lights on. He thought about all the families that had been torn apart while the council called it legitimate enforcement. "Send a message to every human ship in the sector," Jake said, his voice hard as steel. "Tell them what we found here. Tell them the council has been planning to destroy our families for 20 years. And then," Jake Morrison looked at his friend and smiled grimly, "then we show them what happens when you threaten human children." Within hours, the recordings from the research station were broadcasting across human space. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Colonial governors declared independence from council authority. Military commanders stopped taking orders from Earth politicians. Civilian ships started forming into armed convoys. The council had wanted to tame humanity by attacking their young. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping since humans first reached for the stars. The war began officially when Admiral Nicole Pierce revealed herself to the galaxy. For 30 years, she had been Earth's most secret weapon, running black operations that officially never happened. Her ships had no names and her crews had no records. But when the council started murdering human children, Pierce decided it was time to come out of the shadows. Jake Morrison was leading a rescue mission to evacuate the human colony on Tau, said he when Pierce's fleet appeared beside him like ghosts, materializing from empty space. 12 warships that looked like nothing the council had ever seen, armed with weapons that human engineers had been secretly developing for decades. "Captain Morrison," Pierce's voice came over the communications channel, calm and professional. "This is Admiral Pierce of the Earth Defense Force Special Operations Division. I believe we have some work to do together." Jake stared at the ships on his tactical display. They were sleek and deadly, designed for one purpose: war. "Admiral, I didn't know Earth had ships like these." Earth has been preparing for this day since we first joined the Council, Pierce replied. We hoped it would never come, but we knew eventually someone would push us too far. The evacuation of Tau Ceti became the first test of humanity's new way of fighting. The colony had been marked for inspection by Vorthak forces, which everyone now understood meant the systematic removal and probable murder of human children. Instead of waiting for diplomacy to fail again, Pierce's fleet struck first. The Vorthak squadron that arrived expecting helpless civilians found themselves facing weapons that adapted to their shields in real time. Dr. Emma Thompson had designed the new energy systems based on human ingenuity and determination rather than alien technology. Every shot the Vorthak fired taught the human weapons how to hit back harder. Captain Ryan Clark had been a Council loyalist until he saw the recordings from the research station. Now he commanded one of Pierce's ghost ships, the Retribution, and he fought with the fury of someone who had been betrayed by everything he once believed in. Target their weapon systems first, Clark ordered his crew as Vorthak ships tried to flee the battle. I want them alive to tell the Council what happens when you threaten our kids. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with every Vorthak ship either destroyed or surrendering. The human casualties were minimal because Pierce's forces fought with tactics that no alien military had ever encountered. They didn't follow the formal rules of engagement that governed Council conflicts. They fought like their families' lives depended on it because they did. News of the victory at Tau Ceti spread through human space faster than the government could classify it. Commodore Frank Davis, who commanded the new human battle fleet, watched as civilian ships across the sector started upgrading their weapons and forming into military units. Cargo haulers became troop transports. Mining vessels became mobile weapons platforms. Even passenger liners started carrying missiles instead of tourists. The Council's response was swift and brutal. Council War Prime Veltar was an ancient being who had never lost a military campaign in 400 years of service. He commanded a fleet of over 300 ships from 12 different species, all united in their belief that humanity needed to be taught a lesson about respecting authority. The humans have become rabid animals, Veltar announced in a broadcast to the entire galaxy. They attack without provocation and refuse to accept the wisdom of Council guidance. For the safety of all civilized species, they must be contained. The first major battle of the war happened at Rigel Station, a massive trade hub that sat at the intersection of 6 major space routes. The Council sent 50 ships to capture the station and cut off human supply lines. What they found instead was Captain Danny Sullivan and a defense force that had been preparing for this moment since the New Haven massacre. Sullivan was young for a fleet commander, only 32 years old, but he had grown up hearing stories about Earth's wars before the Council. His grandfather had fought in the old conflicts where humans learned to win against impossible odds, and those lessons had been passed down through generations of soldiers who never forgot where they came from. Remember what we're fighting for, Sullivan told his captains as the Council fleet approached. Every ship out there represents the aliens who think our children are acceptable casualties. The Battle of Rigel Station became legendary throughout human space. Sullivan's forces were outnumbered 3-1, but they fought with a desperation and creativity that shocked the Council fleet. Human ships used the station's superstructure as cover, turning a civilian installation into a fortress. They coordinated their attacks with split-second timing, hitting enemy vessels with concentrated fire before disappearing back into the maze of docking bays and cargo holds. Most importantly, they fought dirty. Council military doctrine was based on honor and formal engagement protocols that had governed galactic warfare for centuries. Human tactics were based on winning at any cost. They used the station's industrial equipment as weapons, launching cargo containers full of explosives at enemy ships. They hacked Council communication systems and fed false information to enemy commanders. They even used civilian escape pods as decoys to confuse enemy targeting systems. Admiral Pierce arrived in the middle of the battle with reinforcements that shouldn't have existed. Her ships emerged from hyperspace inside the Council formation, catching the alien fleet completely off guard. The weapons she unleashed were beyond anything the Council had seen before. Energy beams that could punch through any known shield, missiles that could think for themselves and adapt to enemy countermeasures. This is Admiral Pierce to all Council vessels, she broadcast on every frequency. You came here to hurt human families. Now you get to learn what that costs. The Council fleet broke after 8 hours of fighting. Ships that had never retreated from any enemy fled from human weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. War Prime Veltar watched his carefully planned operation turn into a disaster as human forces destroyed or captured 2/3 of his attack fleet. But the real shock came when the humans started rescuing Council survivors from damaged ships. Captain Clark personally led boarding parties to pull wounded aliens from burning hulks, providing medical treatment to the same beings who had come to kill human children. "Why are you helping us?" asked a wounded Vorthak officer as Dr. Grant treated his injuries. "Because that's what humans do," Grant replied simply. "We protect those who can't protect themselves, even when they don't deserve it." The image of human soldiers risking their lives to save alien enemies spread across the galaxy within days. Many Council species began to question whether the Vorthak had been telling the truth about human nature. If humans were really the dangerous savages that Project Domestication claimed, why were they showing mercy to defeated foes? Jake Morrison found himself commanding a fleet of over 40 ships as more human vessels joined the rebellion every day. Engineers and scientists who had been working for the Council quit their jobs and offered their services to the human cause. Even some alien researchers began sending secret intelligence about Council military plans. The war was expanding beyond anything the Council had planned for. They had expected to fight a small rebellion that could be crushed quickly. Instead, they found themselves facing an entire species that had been pushed past the breaking point and was now fighting with the fury of parents protecting their young. In the deepest vaults of Council space, emergency sessions were being held as political leaders realized they might have made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. And with every victory, more species began to wonder if the Council's version of peace was worth the price they were being asked to pay. War Prime. Veltar stood before the Council assembly and delivered a report that no one wanted to hear. "The humans fight like nothing we have ever encountered," he admitted. "They do not follow our rules of warfare. They adapt faster than our strategies can evolve. And worst of all, they fight for something we do not understand." "What do they fight for?" asked Council Prime Zethkar. Veltar looked at the assembled representatives of 46 alien species and spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. "They fight for love." The final battle began when President John Mitchell made the decision that changed everything. He stood in the Oval Office on Earth, looking at reports from across human space that told the same story everywhere. Humans were winning the war, but losing their souls in the process. The fighting had been going on for 6 months, and every victory came with a price that made him sick to his stomach. Fleet Admiral Robert King had just finished briefing the President about Operation Sanctuary, the massive campaign to establish a completely independent human confederation beyond Council reach. The plan was brilliant and terrible at the same time. Humanity would abandon the galaxy they had helped build and start over somewhere else, leaving behind everything they had worked for. "We can't keep running forever," Mitchell said quietly, "and we can't keep fighting like this without becoming the monsters they say we are." Admiral King understood what the President meant. Human forces had become incredibly effective at destroying Council ships and installations, but the cost was measured in more than casualties. Young officers like Captain Danny Sullivan were turning into hardened killers who saw aliens as enemies to be eliminated, rather than people to be protected. The war was changing humanity in ways that scared everyone who still remembered what they had been before. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Emma Thompson, the engineer who had designed humanity's adaptive weapons, approached Admiral Pierce with an idea that sounded impossible. She had been studying the Council's massive space station at the center of their government, a structure called the Heart of Order that contained the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. "Admiral, what if we could capture the heart instead of destroying it?" Thompson asked during a secret meeting aboard Pierce's flagship. "What if we could turn their ultimate weapon into the ultimate symbol of change?" Jake Morrison had been listening to the conversation from across the room, and he walked over to join them. His face was harder now than it had been before the war started, marked by months of fighting and too many friends lost to Council weapons. But his eyes still held the same determination that had made him go rogue in the first place. "Emma's right," Jake said. "We've proven we can beat them in battle. Now we need to prove we're better than them in peace." The Heart of Order was defended by over 500 Council ships from every species in the galaxy. It was supposed to be impregnable, protected by shields that could withstand the explosion of a star and weapons that could destroy entire fleets. War Prime Veltar had made it his final stronghold, betting everything on one last battle that would either crush human resistance or end Council authority forever. Captain Sullivan commanded the first wave of the human assault, leading a strike force of fast ships designed to punch through the Council's outer defenses. His grandfather would have been proud to see how he fought, using tactics that had been passed down through generations of human warriors who refused to give up even when the odds were impossible. "Remember what we learned at Rigel?" Sullivan told his pilots as they approached the massive station. "They have bigger guns, but we have bigger hearts. Use that." The battle for the Heart of Order became the largest space combat in galactic history. Human ships darted between Council formations like angry wasps, striking at weak points and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Admiral Pierce's Ghost Fleet materialized in the middle of the Council defenses, their advanced weapons tearing through shields that were supposed to be unbreakable. But the real breakthrough came when Captain Ryan Clark discovered something that changed the entire nature of the fight. His boarding teams had captured a section of the Heart's outer ring and found something that no one expected: alien children being held in the station's detention levels. "Admiral Pierce," Clark reported over the communication channel, his voice shaking with emotion. "You need to see this. The Council has been keeping kids from dozens of species as hostages. There are thousands of them down here." Dr. Lisa Grant led the medical teams that went into the detention areas, and what she found made her weep. Children from species that had opposed Council policies. Young beings whose parents had been declared enemies of galactic order. Kids who had been taken from their families and used as leverage to control their governments. Among them were human children from colonies that had been attacked before New Haven. Kids who had been missing for years while their families thought they were dead. Emma Williams was there, but not the sister that Lieutenant Kate Williams remembered. This Emma was older and broken, her eyes empty from years of psychological torture designed to turn her against her own species. Jake Morrison stood in the detention center and felt something snap inside his chest. The Council hadn't just been attacking human families. They had been destroying families from every species that dared to question their authority. The Heart of Order wasn't just a military fortress. It was a prison for the galaxy's innocent. "Pierce," Jake said into his communicator, "we're not just capturing this station, we're liberating it." The final assault came when Admiral King arrived with the full Earth Defense Fleet, over 200 ships carrying the finest soldiers that humanity had ever produced. But they weren't coming to destroy the Heart of Order. They were coming to save everyone inside it. Council Prime Zethkar made his last stand in the station's command center, surrounded by the most fanatical supporters of the old system. He had spent 50 years building a galaxy where order mattered more than justice, where stability was more important than freedom. Now he watched human soldiers fighting their way through his fortress not to conquer it, but to rescue children. "You cannot defeat the natural order," Zethkar hissed at Jake Morrison when human forces finally reached the command center. "Some species are meant to rule and others are meant to follow. That is how the galaxy maintains peace." Jake looked at the ancient reptilian leader and saw everything that was wrong with the old system. "You're right about one thing," Jake replied. "Some species are meant to rule, the ones that protect children instead of murdering them." The battle ended when War Prime Veltar himself surrendered his forces to prevent further damage to the detention areas. The old warrior had spent 400 years fighting for the Council. But when he saw human soldiers sharing their food rations with alien children who had been their enemies just hours before, he finally understood what he had been fighting against. President Mitchell arrived at the Heart of Order 3 days after its capture, but he didn't come as a conqueror. He came as the representative of a new kind of government, one where protecting the innocent mattered more than maintaining power. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy as Mitchell stood before representatives from every species, holding the hand of a young alien child who had been freed from the detention centers. "Today we establish a new confederation," he announced. "Not one based on fear or control, but one based on a simple promise. No child will ever again be considered an acceptable casualty." Species after species withdrew from the old council and joined the new confederation. They had seen what humanity was capable of when their children were threatened, but more importantly, they had seen what humans did when alien children needed protection. Jake Morrison found himself promoted to Admiral of the new Confederation's protection fleet, but his most important mission had nothing to do with military operations. He spent his time visiting schools throughout the galaxy, talking to kids from dozens of species about the future they were building together. Dr. Grant established medical centers throughout the Confederation dedicated to treating the psychological trauma that the old council had inflicted on countless families. Her first patient was Emma Williams, who slowly began to remember what it felt like to trust adults again. The Heart of Order was renamed the Heart of Hope and transformed into a school where children from every species could learn together. The detention centers became classrooms. The weapons laboratories became playgrounds. The command center, where Zethkar had planned his campaigns of terror, became a library where young minds could explore the infinite possibilities of a galaxy built on love instead of fear. The first anniversary of the New Haven massacre, Jake Morrison stood in the Heart of Hope's main auditorium and watched children from 47 different species performing a concert together. Human kids played instruments alongside young aliens whose governments had once declared them enemies. They sang songs about friendship and hope and the beautiful future they were going to build together. In the front row, Emma Williams sat beside her sister Kate, both of them crying happy tears as they watched a galaxy where children could finally be safe. The council had wanted to break human families to make them easier to control. Instead, they had taught humanity to become the family that the entire galaxy had been waiting for.